I'll start. Rhode Island, in the paper today, Rhode Island's a losing population.
I read that.
Many company executives complain that the brightest graduates of U.R.I, all Rhode Island colleges, go elsewhere for jobs. How can U.R.I and other colleges, as well as the EDC, stop this brain drain?
Yeah, I think the real answer to that is that there's no immediate fix. There are some steps we can do that I think will help the situation, and one of those, it's clear, I think, that we lose some of our best and brightest young people who we attract to the state simply because even though they may be here 4+ years, they don't gain a sufficiently detailed understanding of what the opportunities are. And we can do a better job there. And we've frankly been working with the private colleges in the state to sort of develop strategies to do that. Now, U.R.I.'s, I think, proud of the fact that a higher percentage of our graduates do stay in the state. More of them come from Rhode Island or have ties to Rhode Island. But I think there's an opportunity for us to use the fact that the University of Rhode Island and Brown University, Providence College, Johnson & Wales, all tend to attract a lot of students from outside Rhode Island, from outside of New England to the state, many of whom I think develop a real affection for the state and would be quite willing to stay if the right opportunities existed for them and if they were made aware of those opportunities. So I think we can do that. And frankly, we need to I would advocate for building a strategy of using the universities and colleges' abilities to attract talent to Rhode Island to help, I think, rebuild Rhode Island's economy and to rebuild our society by making it attractive for them to stay. Now, how do we do that? I think the way we do that is we have to create opportunities for them. That's one of the reasons that U.R.I and Brown joined the Providence Chamber in Beta Spring to recreate the Entrepreneurship Center, so that young entrepreneurs who are attracted to the state see that this is a good climate to launch a business. And we think it can be, and they can be very successful as a startup in Rhode Island. And that's one of the strategies we can pursue. The second strategy we can and should pursue, obviously, is a business attraction strategy. And one of the things we talked about in the EDC several months ago was building a whole business attraction strategy around the assets of higher education. That is, if you look at Johnson & Wales, Bryant, U.R.I, Brown, and the Providence College and the others, New England College of Technology, for instance, Institute of Technology, we have a lot of strengths, complementary strengths that would be attractive to companies to come here and take advantage of. And one of the things we could do for business attraction is really promote that and help companies to identify which assets in higher education are available that would be of interest to them and help them to develop relationships quickly with U.R.I, with Brown in particular as the research universities to make their relocation to Rhode Island attractive and profitable. So I think that's a step we can take. I think another thing we can continue to do, and this is especially, again, relevant to the U.R.I and Brown, is to develop much more aggressively our technology transfer operations so that the results of research carried out in our laboratories can be made available to the private sector either as additional intellectual property coming into a company that already exists or as the foundation for a new company in Rhode Island or a company relocating to Rhode Island. So those are, I think, necessary steps. The final thing I would say is something that became clear from the White House forum I attended, and I apologize for the length of the answer, but you asked a very complicated question. And that is partnerships between the private sector, local government, and by that I mean both the states and the towns here in Rhode Island, and the universities to build centers of excellence around technology transfer, entrepreneurship, and research and development can be highly effective ways of stimulating a lot of economic activity in a relatively short order. And Jen Jordan did the research herself to find out that there's great success stories in places like Florida and South Carolina, many locations outside of Research Triangle in North Carolina where this strategy has been very successful. There's no reason we can't replicate that strategy here in Rhode Island.
President Dooley, you say there's no reason that we can't replicate that here in Rhode Island. And I know you feel that way. I know Neil Steinberg feels that way. And I know that from just speaking with Brown President Christina Paxson, she agrees with you and also wants to bolster Brown's ability to do tech transfer and commercialization. She thinks it's an area that's wanting at Brown as well, a culture that has to be cultivated. But what are the barriers to achieving some of the goals you just laid out? You had 3 concrete ways to leverage basically the assets of higher ed and build our human capital here in the state, thus improving the business climate, making companies want to come. You sit on the EDC. What's standing in the way? What do we have to do collectively as a state to get there?
Well, I think one of the first barriers is happily one I think we've largely overcome, and that is the institutions have to recognize that this should be a priority for them. And I think that's particularly important for Brown and U.R.I., not to minimize any of the other excellent institutions we have here in Rhode Island. But Brown and U.R.I. are the research universities, and that's where a lot of this activity has to be centered, because that's where the new discoveries are being made that can be the foundation for innovation and building an innovation economy here in Rhode Island as it's been built elsewhere. And so the fact that both U.R.I. now, and we've taken a lot of steps over the last few years to improve our performance in this area, change that culture, put in place the management and incentives necessary to really make that more successful than it has been, and we're seeing some great progress there. And I think Brown is very interested in and has a record of doing the same thing. So that's the first thing that has to happen, and I think that's well underway, and I'm very optimistic about that, and the fact that our 2 universities working together can be even synergistic to a greater extent than we have been in the past in making that happen. The second thing that I think that needs to occur is you need to build the public-private coalition that agrees that this is a strategy that the state should pursue. And that's a coalition that needs to include groups like the Providence Chamber and other business groups here in the state, needs to include higher education, and it needs to include state and local government. And we have to be able to come together, agree that this is a strategy we want to pursue, identify the particular elements that need to be put in place here in Rhode Island to succeed as others have succeeded, and then commit ourselves to doing that. And I think that's a step that there's been a lot of conversation about.
Yes.
I'm very encouraged that I think things are moving in that direction. You hear the governor talking about that. You hear members of the EDC board who are fully aware of that as a strategy and were enthusiastic about it when it was an active topic for conversation back a few months ago. I think you have groups like the Providence Chamber on board, and you have the institutions on board. So I think that coalition is beginning to come together.
Okay, that was my question, is do you think it is? Because it could be led, in part at least, by the EDC. In fact, I think when the EDC was first created, that was part of the vision behind it, along with other groups like the Governor's Workforce Board, trying to pull together the business community and public entities. So you do think that coalition is coming together?
I'm optimistic that it is. I mean, one of the things that helped clearly, I believe, was the Make It Happen event that was sponsored by the Rhode Island Foundation. You got a lot of people together there who discovered that they had not just interests in common, but the same convictions about what our key strategies needed to be to move the state forward. And a good dialogue began there. And I think we need to really continue to work on the momentum that was generated from that meeting to build the coalition. Because one of the things that is necessary, absolutely down the road a little ways, is going to be the commitment of resources. If you look inside of what happened in Florida, what happened in South Carolina, what's happened at various other places across the nation where this has succeeded, is the parties have come together to put resources. And that means the private sector, it means government, and it means the public or private institutions.
Do you have any, because you seem to have a clear idea of steps that need to be taken and you're able to articulate them, do you have any advice to what concrete action you'd like the state to take next year, particularly from the vantage point of the EDC?
Well, I think I would like us as an EDC board to take up once again this conversation of how do we use the existence of higher education in the state to serve as a catalyst for economic development, both for business attraction and business stimulation, economic growth in the state. Because one of the things that I haven't spoken about yet, which can also be very important, is by enabling businesses to connect well into higher education's capabilities, you can make existing businesses more profitable, you can help them grow, you can help them add employees and create opportunities. And that's another aspect to this that we need to emphasize.
Can you tie that in a little bit with your idea about perhaps having a business center innovation team of consultants, of faculty, grad students, and so on that you would basically hire out to existing companies?
Exactly. I mean, there are two steps that we're pursuing at the moment along these lines. One is we've been working with the current structure in the state, which is represented by RIMES, the Rhode Island Manufacturing Extension Service. That is a federally supported program out of the Department of Commerce, the National Institutes of Standards and Technologies, the agency from which the funding is derived, I believe. And the new proposal in for the renewal of that funding is a joint proposal between RIMES and U.R.I. And that will build over time, we think, a much closer relationship between that important potential business development and business growth organization and the capabilities of the university, the full capabilities of the university. This is another strategy which I've personally seen to be highly successful. Out in Montana, the Montana Manufacturing Extension Center was an amazing engine of economic growth in that state and helped businesses all over 150,000 square miles of territory to succeed. And we can do that even more readily here by partnering and bringing the full capabilities of U.R.I. To the table. So that's one step. The second step is for us to create an umbrella single portal into all of the assets of the institution that may be of interest to companies, to nonprofits, and to state government and to local governments. And that is whether you need interns, whether you need faculty expertise, whether you need research projects done. The University of Rhode Island may be able to do those for you. And if we can expand that to include the other higher educational entities in the state, you can magnify the impact. Again, we're not proposing something that hasn't been tried and failed. We're proposing something that's been tried and shown to be enormously successful in Michigan. And where they started first at the University of Michigan, the University of Michigan created the Business Engagement Center. That then expanded to include other institutions of higher education in Michigan, Wayne State, Michigan State, and others. So, and it did exactly what we're proposing did. It created a single portal into the University of Michigan first, and then into higher education in Michigan for corporations, businesses, nonprofits, governments to access for expertise and help. We can do that, and that's exactly what we're working on. We hope to roll out the first prototype of this in the spring. We're working actively to do that. It's a partnership at U.R.I. between our foundation and the university. Both entities are going to be involved in creating this portal, what we will call the Corporate Engagement Center or Business Engagement Center here at U.R.I.
I'd like to go back to some of the hurdles you might face. I know you've done great things at U.R.I. You're making it easier for professors to leave and start businesses. They can pocket more money if they have a patent. But you're also losing the head of your economic development team and some other key leaders at U.R.I. How is that going to affect you going forward? And also funding. Government funding is down, state funding is down. How does that affect your plans to move forward?
Well, the funding climate is certainly a problem for the United States, I think, as a whole.
Yeah.
The fiscal cliff that we face right now has the potential to be extremely damaging. You can't go to China, and I've been to China I think half a dozen times since coming to U.R.I., without being struck by the enormous contrast between the investments that the Chinese government is making in critical infrastructure in that country, in higher education in that country, in research in that country, in supporting students in that country, compared to what the United States is doing. Frankly, I think we should be alarmed. I think if you look at the disparities in investment taking place in a place like China or even a place like India compared to the investments being made in these things in the United States, we should all be concerned as Americans about our competitiveness going forward. And I think we should have a level of concern that frankly has a sense of urgency about it, because these things are happening in China, they're happening in India, they're happening in Malaysia, they're happening elsewhere in the world very rapidly, and the level of investment is very large. And we seem to be mired in the United States in an economic and political situation where, frankly, making those kinds of critical investments in our future is very, very difficult. And we need to solve that problem, and solve that problem quickly, I believe. So yes, we could have grave difficulties going forward if federal R&D funds are cut by the magnitude that they're proposed to be cut right now under the Sequestration Act that may go into effect. We should be very concerned about our nation's continued ability to invest in critical infrastructure, whether it be transportation or other types of facilities, and that is problematic. And we all need to work together to try to solve those issues. Here in Rhode Island, I think we need to build, I think, first the consensus about what we want to do, and then tackle the problem of, if this is what we want to do, if this is what we think will provide us a good return on investment, then you can't just look at your expenditures in these areas as spending. You have to look on them as investments to build a brighter future for the state. And if we're not willing to make those investments, it will be very difficult to build a brighter future for this state.
I just want to hit on that point again. When you talk, I get a real sense of urgency and action. When I talk to Education Commissioner Deborah Gist, I get a real sense of urgency and action. Same from Neil Steinberg. I'm wondering why we don't already have the consensus. I'm wondering why the state has to do any more talking about it. And I'm wondering why some of our elected leaders don't seem to share your sense of urgency and action. When you express these thoughts to political leaders in the state, what kind of response do you get?
Pretty positive, actually. I mean, I think there's really a widely held conviction that Rhode Island needs to pursue the kinds of strategies that we're talking about. I think there's a growing national conviction that we need to do that. But let's face it, nationally we're working in a very complex political environment right now that makes building consensus towards major new investments or just maintaining investments in these critical areas difficult. And that national, I think, situation has impacts here in Rhode Island and elsewhere on one side. And secondly, here in Rhode Island, I think we're caught up in, again, a very difficult economic climate where there's very large demands on social services. There are very large demands for trying to hold down tax increases in a state where, in many respects, we're not as competitive, perhaps, as we need to be regionally. And you can't ignore those kinds of things. I think if these were easy things, you'd see a lot of money flowing in. And one of the reasons you see a lot of money flowing into these sorts of things in places like China is that the economy's been growing double digits for a decade or so. It makes generating large sums of capital for investment relatively straightforward, and that's difficult to do in the United States right now, and it's particularly difficult to do in a small state like Rhode Island where we have a lot of budget constraints. So I think that's the issue, is simply figuring out how to make the critical investments that we need in light of all the other needs that we have in Rhode Island. I mean, our needs for social services are critical, and you hate to see those shortchanged. Our needs for infrastructure in the state are critical. You hate to see that shortchanged. So we have a complicated multi-parameter problem to solve, but I think there's a strong willingness on the part of many people I've talked to try to figure out how to do that.
Do you think this is something you have to sell to the average Rhode Islander, the taxpayer? I mean, it sounds like a lot of people at the top believe that this should happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Rhode Island is an interesting state in a whole number of ways, and one of them is I don't want to overgeneralize here, but I think there are many Rhode Islanders, I'll put it that way, there are probably many Rhode Islanders who are a little skeptical of this kind of activity, and perhaps for good reason. I don't know the history of past efforts along these lines very well. And there is that degree of skepticism that exists out there that has to be overcome if we're going to do this. But I think the main point is I think, and we're beginning to see this now, Brown University just put its economic impact statement out there. We're doing one for us, for U.R.I. It'll be roughly the same magnitude, if not greater. And what that lifespan has done, what that does is it begins to make the case, I think, to all the people of Rhode Island that expenditures in these areas are, as I say, it's not just spending. It is investing in making things better, and that yes, it costs something in order to make things better, but if you aren't willing to pay that cost, you won't improve. You won't create the opportunities that you need to provide a better economy and a better society for everyone. So that is something that we do have to get across and build a political consensus inside the state to achieve.
I just wanted to return to the vision you laid out most clearly for us within the past couple of months about expansion in Providence and Kingston. And central to that vision is this new nursing school. And it's hit some bumps along the way. I know you're still hopeful that it will be included, hopefully, in the budget that's coming out in 2013. Have you received any kind of feedback or support from the governor, from George Carullo, from Speaker Fox, Senator Paiva-Weed, anyone else in the past month or two indicating that it's a priority for them and it will be in the budget?
Well, I think you quoted both the Speaker and the Senate President in your article on this, Jen, and they had some very positive things to say, which I'm glad they said to you. I have been. I mean, there's a lot of activity going on. We're working very closely with the governor's office, with the Department of Administration right now on exactly what form a request should take if it's going to be included in the state budget, and in particular what form it should take if we proceed in our preferred mode of doing this as a public-private partnership, and what the strategy and steps need to be in order to make that a reality. So we've received a lot of encouragement. We're working on that with them right now. And again, you don't know; those decisions aren't made at this point. But I'm optimistic that we can move this project forward. As you know, it's not so much. It's not really the creation of a new school that we're talking about. It's expanding the facilities for two existing schools and placing those in downtown Providence. So we have a lot to bring to the table already. We've got the faculty. We have a lot of the expertise. Obviously, we have facilities in some respects that can move into the new location. But what we can't do is we can't expand, and we cannot work as closely as we would like to work with Brown and Lifespan if we stay in our current locations. And we wouldn't have this possible, I think, likely transformative economic impact of bringing everything together in the heart of the city, building a critical mass around medical education and research that can be a stimulus to a lot of additional activity in the heart of Rhode Island. And I think that would be good for all of Rhode Island, because I think if we can really stimulate by this project economic growth in Providence, we'll stimulate economic growth more broadly.
Okay, so let me now, do you mind if I just ask the Brown questions now?
Because, sure.
Okay, so last week, I had my first interview with Brown President Christina Paxson, and talking to her after having talked to you, I was struck by how on the same page she is. She agrees with you that Providence has the potential to be a healthcare powerhouse. It's also where a lot of her own interest lies, both in her research, but also she's running a school that has a program of public health she wants to turn into a school and a medical school. It's almost a no-brainer. And she very much wants greater collaboration with U.R.I. and the hospitals of exactly the type of collaboration you're describing. And she also wants Brown researchers to do more to commercialize their research and have spin-offs. Brown's also taking a look at where to expand. Just like U.R.I., they need to expand. So do you think if Brown and URI can articulate a clearer message about joining forces and, as you put it, magnifying efforts, that might help move this concept along and realize the vision you just laid out of a medical, really a regional powerhouse for medicine.
I think that's entirely possible, and I'm very enthusiastic about that. I think one of Rhode Island's most compelling and unique assets is the degree to which the public research university and the Ivy League institution, co-located only a few miles apart, have already begun to work together, already have a lot of collaborative research together, have already brought in tens of millions of dollars to the state as a result of that collaboration, and are anxious to do more. That is a very, very unusual partnership. If you look across the landscape of the Northeast, I don't think you see another relationship like the Brown URI relationship between an Ivy and a public research university.
And do you think it will be strengthened because of you and President Paxson wanting that?
I certainly hope so. I think your characterization is quite right. President Paxson and I see these things very similarly. It's been one of the great delights in welcoming her to the state because she does have an economic development background. She's a scholar in this area. She's thought deeply about it. She brings professional expertise to the table as well as her own influence, obviously, as the president of Brown University. And I think we are in complete agreement on the strategies. We're in complete agreement on the desirability and the mutual benefit that would accrue to both institutions from a much closer collaboration. And that would include a much closer co-location feature between things that we're doing at the University of Rhode Island and things that are happening at Brown.
It just also seems very unforced. In other words, it seems like a natural fit, particularly when you're talking about nursing needing higher levels of research and expertise and advanced degrees now because of the evolution in that field. You're talking about the physical proximity of the hospitals. You're talking about important brain research going on just in the jewelry district. It just seems like a dovetail more than each institution going out of its way to kind of fabricate a collaboration. It seems almost like a no-brainer.
It's interesting you use no-brainer and brain research in the same sentence.
Maybe I'm jet-lagged.
But no, I agree with you. It is unforced. It is a collaboration that has grown up naturally by mutual interest of the faculties. And that's what makes it strong, because the heart of all of this activity is, of course, the research and teaching done by the faculty. And if they see the advantages of working together, if they're attracted to collaborate and to share resources and to build joint programs, then it's easy for the institutions to be successful in that because the faculty drive it. It's driven by that interest and their passion. One thing about faculty is they can be extremely passionate about what they're doing. They'll work 70 hours a week to do what they're doing. And if they decide that it's really in their mutual interest to work together, then you can really accomplish a lot. And that's what's very exciting about it. So now I think President Paxson and I have to work out the ways we can best harness, stimulate further growth in this area, and enhance our abilities to collaborate and cooperate together.
I'm wondering, I mean, there's this sudden collaboration, this kind of movement among educators and nonprofits and private industry. It seems like you're moving into a vacuum that was created maybe by the political leaders. I mean, you seem to be taking the role and they seem to be lagging behind. Is this a new role for this group, or?
Well, I don't know if it's not a new role
Yeah.
in the sense that I would say for public land grant universities. It's why we were created. If you go back and you look at what was the whole idea of the public land grant institution, it was to do precisely what we're trying to do at the University of Rhode Island now, and that is do research, educate, and serve. And part of that service means disseminating the results of the education and the research out broadly to the population to enhance their well-being, and that means their economic and social well-being, amongst many other things. And that means, amongst other things, working on economic development. Yeah. So really what we're doing, what I see that what I'm trying to do at the University of Rhode Island and what our faculty are doing and the institution as a whole, is really just adding, perhaps some additional energy to that effort.
Yeah.
That has long been a part of our mission, and making it a sort of pointed focus, because the needs are great right now, and if we want to create a better future for ourselves, the surest way to do that is to create a better future for the state to which we belong, where our home is, and I think people are really beginning to understand that on the campus. And I think what you've seen over the last 10 years in the United States, probably really 20 years, you've seen the growing role of both public and private universities in providing this sector of innovation to the economy. Back in the days where you had Bell Labs and IBM Labs were at their pinnacle, you had RCA Labs, you had Ford Motor Labs. You had corporate America ran major research centers that generated a lot of new technologies and new ideas. And they invested in that research with a long view. That is, a lot of research happened at Bell Labs that wasn't going to help AT&T's telephone monopoly for 30 years, and that didn't matter to them.
Yeah.
They just thought it was important because enough would come out of it that would make it make corporate sense to do that. Most of that's gone now in America. Even the big pharmaceutical companies have consolidated, and some of them have downsized their core R&D operations. And what you're seeing instead is that function is being replaced in our nation by the work of the research universities, and faculty and students spinning off ideas into new companies, which then the private sector nurtures, perhaps participates in with angel and venture investments, and then acquires and brings inside the existing company, or grows a new company out of that. And that's in many respects, that strikes me as it's sort of a new strategy in the United States for innovation compared to what probably existed 30 years ago. So a lot of American institutions think like this now, institutions of higher education, that we've taken on this role nationally. And therefore, obviously, we're going to be taking on this role in Rhode Island. So I think that's been a factor behind maybe research universities becoming much more prominent in this role than what may have been the case in the past.
Okay, that's very interesting. Building on that,
I'm not sure she's convinced that it's interesting.
No, I listened to that and I was interested. Going back to Paul's beginning question about brain drain, I remember in October there was a venture of the public and private colleges, I think somehow related to RIHI or RISLA, to have a portal for internships in the state. And it's, again, a neat idea because it's leveraging how small the state is and the fact there are 10 or 11 universities here, so we have thousands of talented people in the state. And why not hook them up with great jobs and summer jobs and internships while they're here in college? It gives them work experience, and maybe they'll end up staying working at Hasbro or Textron or what have you. Another leg of that stool, so that's one potential way to make Rhode Island more attractive for young talent. Another leg of the stool is the point that you and President Paxson keep honing in on, which is you both are research institutions, and both of you would like to see the research being done at your institutions generate more economic activity in the state. How can you, and President Paxson, but in this case you, foster that kind of culture in your institutions so that there are more faculty opening up spin-off companies in the jewelry district and in Kingston and so on? When Paul asked you that question for the oceanography story, you hinted that maybe the key is hiring some faculty that are geared that way, that are entrepreneurial in spirit. Can you just elaborate on what you'd like to see done?
Sure. I mean, I think that is a key point. I mean, part of the thing you do, you're talking about changing institutional culture. And I think the really good news here is I think there's a strong interest on the U.R.I. campus, and at Brown, but I'll speak to U.R.I. right now, in evolving the culture in that direction. A strong interest on the part of the faculty and graduate students and others who would be engaged directly in that work. A lot of willingness to take it on. So what do you need to do? Well, first you do have to change your policies, and we've been working very hard to craft new policies about intellectual property protection and transfer that incentivize faculty to do it. And we're working on that, and we'll continue to do that. One of the things you want to do is, again, you want to have a good leave policy. And what our goal at U.R.I. is to work through that so that we have a leading policy on this. That is, I think we can go a little further than some other institutions. Maybe it's a little bit of more of a risk, but we should be willing to take that risk and be more generous than that. And this, give our faculty the opportunity to take a leave of absence, go off and start a company, but still hold on to a guarantee that when they come back to the institution, their position is there. I think that's a key step. Another step is hiring faculty with that mindset. You're looking for new people to bring in. They could be at the senior level where they've already demonstrated that capacity. It's one of the things we're looking at U.R.I. Or they can be, newly minted PhDs who have that same interest, and you identify that interest and you bring them in, and then they're part of the organic culture of the institution. Another thing to do, and again, this is something I've seen work very successfully, is you want to, and building this portal externally to businesses and companies, is you want to make available to them both the facilities and the expertise of the university. So you say if you're a company and you have a problem to solve, and we've seen this work very successfully in our engineering capstone projects in the College of Engineering, a problem to solve that may be very important in terms of new product development or efficiencies in manufacturing or whatever it might be, you can come into the institution for a relatively modest amount of money because you don't have to buy equipment, facilities, or hire. You just pay existing people, and graduate students and undergraduates work pretty cheaply, and faculty, and support what's already existing at the university, and we do the project for you and give you the results, the answers that you need. That can work very successfully. There's a great, again, this work, we did this a lot at Montana State University, and that work at Montana State University was the foundation of a whole optical sciences industry in the town of Bozeman, because we had real expertise, and we did R&D on behalf of local companies and transferred it back out to those companies, as well as spinning off new companies. The University of Minnesota has just put this into effect, where they have a new structure so that companies can come in and with very transparent process that protects everybody's intellectual rights and trade secrets and everything else, and get research done at the University of Minnesota to benefit them. And we can do that. There's no reason we can't do that in Rhode Island at U.R.I., and that's one of our goals.
So it would seem that a lot of this activity that you're talking about necessitates you having a very strong Vice President of Research and Economic Development, and I believe you're going to be conducting a national search. Is that correct? That's
exactly right.
And when are you hoping to have a new person in place to oversee a lot of these efforts and coordinate them?
By June, next June. So we'll formally launch the search in January, and we hope to have the candidate here in June.
It's a pretty lean operation. Will you have plans to beef it up or maybe add a few people?
It is a pretty lean operation, and we do have to look at that because two things. One, even though federal funding for research has been stagnant or declining, federal reporting and accountability measures have been steadily increasing. So just to conduct the existing research has meant institutions across the country have added people in a variety of ways to fulfill compliance and reporting obligations to the federal granting agencies. And obviously, I mean, we need to create new capabilities in the institution. That's one of those things that we're doing is we're reinvesting part of the indirect cost recovery that we receive off federal grants back into this. We're reinvesting part of what we get on licensing and other intellectual property exploitation opportunities that we successfully pursue. Some of those revenues are coming back and being fed into to do this, so that we can, I think, make sure that we have the robust unit in research and economic development that we really need to have. I mean, we have to, given the state situation, we have to fund a lot of that ourselves.
I think you've articulated this through all of your answers, but One of the things we're trying to convey with this end of the year project is twofold. One is it's going to take all of us from all different sectors and walks of life in Rhode Island to help get the economy moving in the right direction. But secondly, you can't underestimate the importance of leadership and vision. When we look to other states that have much lower unemployment rates than we do, or when you look at some of the universities that are doing these exciting things and having real payoffs, it took both leadership and vision. So it seems to me that in the beginning of this conversation, your outlook on economic development in Rhode Island is we've got to better leverage the incredible assets that higher education gives us here in the state. It's kind of a unique setup here, and we're not exploiting it to the full. Is that correct?
I believe that, yes, that is correct.
And you are obviously advocating for that on the EDC. That is one of your primary. Is there more of an action plan than merely saying we need more education, infrastructure, and workforce development? What do political leaders need to do, joining with philanthropies, the business community, and higher ed, to articulate a clear vision moving forward in 2013?
Well, I think in answering the question, you sort of answered it. I think the key step is for us to come together at the table and to begin to craft the strategies, which, you know, is not equivalent to picking winners and losers. Even though I'll note, just as a sidelight, you know, governments have picked winners and losers in the economic development business practically since there were governments. The United States has to invest billions in fostering the fossil fuel industry. That's picking a winner. And saying we're willing to subsidize fossil fuel production and discovery, and that helps that industry be robust and successful. Everybody looks at Texas as an economic powerhouse, and it is. You look inside what the governors of Texas have done. They picked winners and losers now for a couple of decades in Texas. And one of the winners they picked in Texas, which was a big winner, was medicine. And they built the world-class medical center that exists in Houston. They did that deliberately. And but I'm not saying that you identify individual companies and declare one to be a winner and one to be a loser. But I think it is an appropriate function for all of us to come together, look at our assets. Look, what are we good at? What can we bring to the table? What our competitive advantages are? What strengths do we have? What strengths can we augment with the right kind of investment? Look at that collectively and say, where does that match up in terms of economic capabilities? And then say, those are areas that we should probably invest in. Those are areas we should concentrate on. Those are areas where we can succeed. And I think one of those clearly in Rhode Island is all around 21st century healthcare, with the hospitals that we have here, with the research enterprises that exist inside of Care New England and Lifespan, as well as Brown and U.R.I. In particular. That can be an area of great strength. We can look at other areas where you look at the research capabilities of U.R.I., you look at the research capabilities of Brown, you look at the programs of all of our higher education institutions, and you say, these are areas where we have strength. It should be attractive for companies to be here and to work with us. And that's what I'm saying is, let's get together and identify those areas, think what strategic areas of emphasis match up well to our capabilities, and then that's, I think, the basis for a plan going forward. I think one of the things this recession should teach us is that staying the course is not going to succeed. When the world is changing so rapidly, and where our global economic competitors are investing in major ways towards what they see the future is going to be, a stay the course kind of strategy for us is not going to be successful.
Okay, now I want to talk to you for just 3 minutes about China, because I'm actually wondering, Paul, if that should be a little breakout story, just this trip that he took to China. You're right. When you look at the economic projections for Rhode Island and our pace of growth and recovering the jobs, things are bleak. through 2020 unless we do something dramatically to change course now. It's going to take us like another decade just to regain the jobs that we lost, let alone add new ones. And here, we know too many of them are in low-wage service sector jobs, and we just found out today we're losing
the census report, right, is that jobs that people are leaving were making more than the people who are coming in. That's not a good prognosis.
No, and as John Kostrova said, you don't want to be in a state that's losing population. This just so, just talk to us for a few minutes about China, why you were there, what you saw when you were there, and going back to this idea of global competitiveness. How long were you in China?
This trip, 9 days.
9 days, and this is approximately the 6th trip you've taken since 2009?
Yes.
Why have you gone there so often, may I ask?
We have been really growing our programs that are relevant to China. For example, we've added a language major in Chinese that's proved very popular. We've added Chinese as an option in the international engineering program. And we've done that because we think China is, along with America, going to be the single most influential country. Those two countries are going to be the most influential countries in the 21st century. It's going to be the United States and China, I think. Will largely determine the course of the world's economy, and probably the course of a lot of things that happen in the world will be the interaction between the United States and China, and the degree to which we either collaborate or compete will be critical. And we think that we can benefit that future by, as a research university, by engaging with our counterparts in China and preparing our students to be productive in a global economy where the two largest economies are going to be the U.S. economy and the Chinese economy. And that's what we want to prepare our students for. So we began on that strategy a few years ago, and it's been paying off. And one of the things that's been paying off has been in building partnerships in China with very prominent, successful universities there. And so on this last trip, for instance, we were meeting with several Chinese universities. We were signing new memorandum agreements.
This would be in Beijing and Shanghai.
Beijing, Hangzhou, Qingdao, Wuhan, and so that's a piece.
And what is the memorandum of agreement do for
U.R.I.? It covers things like student exchange. It covers things like dual degree programs. Covers faculty interactions, potentially joint research projects between our Chinese counterparts and the University of Rhode Island.
Do we know approximately how many U.R.I. students have studied or are considering studying in China, and also has the Kingston campus seen an influx of Chinese scholars?
The answer to that second question is most definitely. We're seeing considerable growth in the number of Chinese students coming to the University of Rhode Island. We'll see consistent growth over the next several years.
Any sense of how many?
Well, it depends. In other words, we have one university that sends a group of 20 to 25 students for several weeks every summer. We have other institutions that send smaller groups. We have more Chinese students coming to U.R.I. to pursue bachelor's degrees, doctoral degrees, and master's degrees. One of the meetings that we had in Beijing was with the Chinese Scholarship Commission, which funds Chinese students to study.
Nationally.
Yeah, to study in the United States in particular.
Are all of their universities private, public, or do they have some private ones now too? When you just listed
Those
Beijing,
are all public institutions.
They're all public.
All public institutions. Many of the ones that we work with are in the so-called Chinese Group of Nine, which is the 9 most prominent Chinese universities, and we now have relationships with probably 4 of those.
And what about U.R.I. students going to China?
We're sending U.R.I. students there to study Chinese. We're sending U.R.I. students there to pursue their engineering as part of their international engineering program, where they'll take engineering in China and then do an internship in a company in China.
I was thinking particularly civil engineering, because there's such a building boom going on.
Civil engineering, but and I'll come back to this in a second, but civil engineering is huge, but mechanical, electrical engineering, there's also a great deal. A lot of manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing goes on in China, where they're looking for electrical engineers and mechanical engineers. A lot of U.S. companies and global companies have major operations in China. Sensata, up here in the road, just over the border, right? Sensata, major company in building high-tech sensors. They have a major manufacturing center in China, not too far from Shanghai. We visited them. They're very interested. We've already had one intern go. They're very successful.
Thinking your MBA program too would be
MBA, they're very interested. We had a very good conversations with 2 Chinese universities about really working with us on the so-called Blue MBA, which combines the MBA with oceanography. One of the things that China has recognized is that they, for too long as a nation, simply looked at the water as something that's not part of them.
Yeah.
And they no longer have that view. And it's now been a major policy shift of Chinese governments. And that means they're ramping up very rapidly, trying to ramp up very rapidly their capabilities and everything to do with the oceans.
How about requiring all of them to take classes at CELS?
They're very interested in the kinds of things that we're doing in marine biology and aquaculture. And that was some of the conversations. They're very interested in partnering with the Graduate School of Oceanography and in our ocean engineering departments. So URI's prominence in this area has certainly been caught the attention of the Chinese, I'll put it that way. And some of their best universities are now working to develop programs around that, and that's one of the reasons that they want to develop relationships with the University of Rhode Island.
Do you envision, I know that this was very popular about 5 years ago, and it's actually become less popular. I think maybe 5 years ago you saw a little explosion of some American universities opening up foreign campuses, particularly in the Middle East you saw it, but you saw a little bit of exploration in India and so on. Some of those camp arrangements worked okay, some didn't. You saw a little bit of a pullback, and now there's more of this relationship building you're talking about. Down the line, what do you think would make sense for URI?
Well, I think the first thing that's going to make sense for URI is strengthening our partnerships now with the set of universities that we've developed these agreements with, because it's quite an excellent set.
Okay, how about 4 you said that you're really networking
Well,
with?
let's see. The ones that we're working closely, beginning to work closely with include Zhejiang University, and I'll have to give you the spellings of all of these later. Which is our primary partner right now for the International Engineering Program and for our Confucius Institute programs. Zhejiang University, it's in the city of Hangzhou, a few hours north of Shanghai.
Okay.
By car.
And you and Bryant are the only two that have the Confucius connection,
Institute.
correct?
Right, that's right. So that's a major partner. The Ocean University of China, which is in Qingdao, home of Qingdao beer. That's one of our major partners. Minzu University in Beijing. That's the Chinese ethnic university. We're doing something very interesting there. We have a program there where their students who are being educated to teach Chinese to foreigners are now, some of them are going to be coming to URI to earn a master's degree and to be certified as public school teachers in the United States. And the first 2 are just passed the exam for licensure. And
That's a separate
the idea
story.
is
That's a separate story. So you're getting in trouble with them. So in January, I think that's a story. Okay.
I get in trouble with them all the time.
Yeah.
Their job is to help me, clean up trouble I cause. So that I think is going to be a very nice program. So that we're working. We just signed a new set of agreements with HUST, HUST University. I don't forget offhand what that stands for, in Wuhan. Again, around engineering and science. And we had a new set with Tsinghua, which is the #1 Chinese Institute for Engineering and Science. And one
It's
of the
their
top
MIT.
20, it's their Caltech, I prefer to think of it.
Of course.
It's their top science and engineering school in China, and we'll be working with them, it looks like, in a number of ways around oceanography and ocean engineering. So it's quite a network of top-tier institutions. Our Chinese language programs, we also work at Nanjing University, which is one of their top 5 institutions as well. And so go back to your question. Our focus is going to be developing those partnerships, increasing the flow of our students into those institutions.
More of them come to
More
you.
of those students coming into URI, and working to build global partnerships between them and URI. And that'll be our focus. And
Right.
we're not looking at opening a branch
Okay.
campus or anything like that at the moment, because I think we can leverage the assets of our partners much
And-
more effectively.
So now scare us a little bit.
Okay?
Tell us about the dynamic stuff going on and the building up that's going on in China as opposed to us kind of being stuck.
Well, let's just take one example. Zhejiang University is going to build a new college of oceanography, a new oceanographic institute.
Where are they located again?
They're in Hangzhou. The Chinese have just dedicated 50 hectares.
Is that coastal? That's why I'm asking. Is
No,
it-
it's no, because their oceanography, it's not coastal. Their oceanographic institute will be built on an island off the coast, connected to the mainland by a bridge. 50 hectares of land they've just been given. They will be investing over the next few years $300 million in one university to build one oceanographic institute.
And-
Now they're doing similar levels of investment in all of their major universities.
And they have a lot of them.
And they have at least 10 or 15 that they're making those kinds of investments in. So that's
And do you know
$300
what-
million in one, and that's not all the investment they're making in that institution. They're giving
Just
tens of
oceanography.
millions in
Do you
addition.
know what their main interest is in terms of oceanography? Are they looking at exploring natural resources in the ocean or
Of course.
drilling? Yeah.
Of course, I mean, they're interested in the oceans in the same way that we are. They're interested in the oceans as a food source. They're interested in the oceans as resource sources. They're interested in oceans and understanding the climate change impacts on their coastal regions, what that will mean. They've done an enormous amount of investment in construction along coastal China now. Well, they need to understand what the worldwide effects of climate change are going to be. The Chinese agree that climate change is real and that they've got to tackle it. So those are some of their interests behind building up in these areas.
Do you think the last time the United States saw a similar kind of burst of investment and energy in higher ed would have been during the whole Sputnik
The
race to the moon?
1960s, unquestionably,
Pretty far back.
was the last time I think.
Yeah.
But that's also when we saw exponential growth by all indicators in the world and as a global leader in higher ed, right?
Yeah.
So that was the last time the U.S. saw this kind of.
And the colleges and universities in the United States expanded dramatically after World War II because of the GI Bill. Those were a lot of veterans that sought a college education, and we had to build capacity for that. And secondly, then you had the impetus of Sputnik and the dawn of the technological era, which really further stimulated major investments in U.S. in terms of developing our capabilities in science and engineering. That's where you saw several new campuses of the University of California were created in the 60s. You saw expansion of higher education practically coast to coast in the 60s, and the development of massive infrastructure for research. So that's when we began really developing some of the national laboratories much more aggressively. So it's been a long time since the United States has had a systematic investment of that magnitude in higher education.
And it seems to me you're
It's what's
saying maybe
happening
it's
in China
time.
right now. I think nationally, I would say it's time for us to take a very hard look at whether we are blighting the future of the United States by short-term thinking and not preparing to be competitive in the global economy.
Because China and India aren't sitting around waiting.
They're not sitting around.
Okay. Paul, do you have anything else? No, this is great. Thank you so much for
You're very
coming in to
welcome.
speak with us.